The housing market continues to march forward and reach new highs in price as many people are lining up to buy real estate. Maybe we're reaching a peak in the market. Who knows? You can never really time these things with much accuracy unless you're very lucky. But I want to take a look at the supply side of the housing market right now. And I'm not talking about forbearance programs that are ending or the eviction moratorium issues that we've seen throughout the last couple of years, but really I want to talk about new construction, since that is obviously a very important part of the real estate market. How much new supply is coming online? Not just old supply that's being brought onto the market, but literally new supply that has been built up from the ground and is added to the housing supply, more housing units coming online. Because there are some interesting things going on right now when it comes to new construction. And this is a chart from the Federal Reserve, our friends over at the Fed, who have been gracious enough to provide us with this chart of new privately owned housing units under construction. And this is all residential units. So not just single family, not just multifamily, but stay tuned. We'll break it down to see where a lot of this construction is coming from. If we look at today, we're at around 1.5 million new units that are currently under construction in the US. And that is actually close to where we were near the peak of the housing boom prior to the 2008 crash. We can see back in about 2006, that's around where the new housing construction was at, about 1.4 to 1.5 million units, which rapidly dropped off all the way down to its trough in about 2011 of about 400,000 units being under construction at that time. But over the next decade, we saw a lot of that construction momentum begin to pick up again, though it did kind of plateau around 1.1 million units when we were heading into 2020, and we saw a pretty significant drop in March of 2020, but look what's happened since then. We've seen a very significant spike in housing construction. And again, this is units currently under construction in the US. Let's break this down a little bit. How many of these units are single family homes versus multifamily units? And how does this compare to previous times, mainly leading up to the 2008 crash, to see how we can possibly compare these two time periods? Well, here's single family units under construction. And this number actually peaked around 2006 at almost a million units under construction at any given time. That's 990,000 in February 2006. Consistent with that total chart we just looked at, there was a significant drop off leading up to the trough all the way in 2011 or so at around 230,000 units under construction at that time. And that was the recent trough we had. And that has continued to climb back up, but also likewise plateaued between about 2018 and 2020. And this was at about 500,000 units under construction. And we did see a noticeable dip in March of 2020, but we've seen construction come roaring back, and current single family homes under construction is almost 50% higher than it was at in March of 2020. If we look at today, there are about 700,000 units of single family homes under construction. But even with the recent short-term run-up in single family homes under construction, that's still only about 70 to 75% of the peak that we saw back in 2006, when the peak was at about a million units under construction. But let's take a look at multifamily units under construction to see what different sort of story the multifamily side is telling us compared to the single family side. Currently, there are over 700,000 multifamily units that are under construction in the US. And this is a recent high, at least over the last few decades. I think we have to go all the way back to the 1970s to where the number was this high. And it really is part of this overarching narrative of the last decade, starting from about 2010, where multifamily has seen a significant run up well past the 2008 peak of around 450 to 500,000 units under construction for multifamily. It is well beyond that now at well over 700,000. And the number of multifamily units under construction was surging in 2019 into 2020 until we hit the pandemic in about March of 2020. It plateaued a bit, dropped a bit, and now it seems to be starting its surge again, although it doesn't seem to be as aggressive as the surge we've seen in single family, but it's starting at a much higher level compared to its historical trend. Because again, multifamily construction is at a level that we haven't seen in many decades, going all the way back to the 1970s when it was at this level. It's not unprecedented, but I do think it's worth noting because I think it marks a very distinctive characteristic of the housing market now versus decades ago. The multifamily market continues to be very hot, and because of that, you see a lot of development going towards it, perhaps more than you might expect if you're just looking at the historical trend line. But because of the demand that multifamily assets continue to have to this day, we're seeing a lot of suppliers and construction firms coming in and building more units on the multifamily side. Perhaps this would be a lot easier to sell than building a giant subdivision of many single family units, and that might be why there are historically a greater amount of multifamily multifamily units being produced. But don't forget, there still are a lot of single family units being produced, and the rate has increased very significantly just over the past couple of years. But what does this mean for the housing market? Well, like I kind of prefaced at the beginning, this is on the supply side, and it's one factor of many that goes into determining what will happen with the housing market, the prices we might see. The number of units available obviously plays a big role in the price of those units, because if you have the same amount of demand but more units enter the picture, you're going to expect that thing to be worth less. Not that it's not providing value, but there's just more of them and the same amount of dollars chasing them. Though the amount of dollars chasing things is definitely a moving target. However, if you have a lot of units come into the market in a very short period of time, you might expect a pretty significant drop in prices, at least for certain asset classes. Maybe we'll see that with multifamily. Maybe we'll see that with single family. And while it's probably a bit easier to take a look at the demand side, where you can see interest rates, what those are at, how many people are buying homes right now, the amount of people that are lining up for open houses just to try and buy the one home, it seems like demand is very frothy, and that's probably true. But don't forget the other side of the same coin, and that is supply, because the number of new units coming online is going to play a fundamental role in what the housing market's going to look like in some time. But there is a bit of a lead time on this. It's not as though these units are coming online tomorrow. These can take many months, even years, depending on the size of the development. So just because something's under construction now doesn't mean it's going to come online in the next week. But I'll be curious to see what happens with the construction market as we continue to see supply shortages in general with materials. What's going to happen to the construction market over the next couple of years? That will be very interesting to see and will play a big role in the housing market. Anyways, just wanted to share some of this data with you. If you found it informative, definitely leave a like on the video. And if you like this sort of content about the real estate market or just investing and personal finance in general, then definitely subscribe, since I put out new videos every single week about those topics. And while you're at it, check out some of the free stuff and the affiliate links in the description below. But until next time, take care.